This is LSAT Prep Test 134, Section 4, Passage 1 about crime deterrence. Two sides of a legal debate that look like opposites but turn out to be the same thing. It's a low difficulty passage. This is structurally one of the cleanest you're ever going to see. But that simplicity is actually where students mess up because they end up overthinking it. Now, this passage does one thing. It takes two camps that seem to be fighting and proves they are compatible. That's it. If you leave the passage thinking the author picked a side, you've already lost points. Now, paragraph 1 here is pure setup. Two groups of scholars disagreeing. One group says crime is a social problem. You've got to fix institutions, change people's beliefs, and open up economic access. The other group says crime is an individual choice, so you've got to jack up penalties and make enforcement tougher. You want to move through this at a normal pace. Don't memorize all the policy recommendations. Just tag which side blames society and which side blames the person. That's all you've got to get out of this paragraph. But you also don't want to blow past the last sentence because that's where the author steps in. You get the word however, and then the claim that these two positions are surprisingly complementary. And that word surprisingly is telling you the author knows this sounds counterintuitive. They're flagging that the rest of the passage is going to explain something you wouldn't expect. So now you know exactly where this is headed. The passage is not going to pick a winner, it's going to clean up the fight. Now, paragraph 2 is the most important paragraph in this set. You want to slow down here. This is where the author introduces the concept of utility maximization, and if you skim it, the rest of the passage is going to fall apart. But the idea is actually pretty simple once you strip away the jargon. People make choices based on what gives them the best expected outcome. You look at what could happen, how likely each outcome is, and how much each one is worth to you. Then you pick the option with the highest total. That is it. And so under this principle, crime is just a cost-benefit decision. The author isn't saying crime is okay. They're saying you can model it like any other economic choice. You want to lock in on that before you move on. Now, paragraph 3 is where the payoff hits. This is the author applying the framework to both sides. A person commits a crime when the expected benefit beats the expected cost of getting caught. And so, how do you deter crime? There's two ways. You can raise the cost with tougher penalties and better enforcement. That's what the individual choice camp wants. Or you can raise the benefit of staying legal with better economic opportunities and more access to institutions. That's what the social factors camp wants. Both sides are just adjusting different variables in the same equation. You want to read this at a pretty steady pace. The logic will flow naturally if paragraph 2 clicked for you. Now, the final chunk is short and does exactly what you would expect. The author says the two positions are not fundamentally in conflict, and the best deterrence strategy would be to use elements of both. No surprises there. Now, the key move is the reconciliation. Both sides of the debate map onto the same utility equation. They are pulling different levers, not fighting over which lever exists. Now, the hardest questions are going to test whether you understand that the author is not choosing a side. Now, the author's stance here is genuinely neutral. They think both approaches are valid because both change the math in the same direction. The big trap here is any answer choice that says the author prefers one camp, but they don't. A second trap is treating this as a passage about utility maximization itself. It is not. Utility maximization is the bridge the passage is about resolving a debate. Now, there's one more thing you want to watch for here. Some wrong answers will describe what each side recommends in accurate detail, but frame it as being the passage's main point. But the main point is not what either side recommends. The main point is that they're not actually in conflict. So you don't want to confuse accurate content with the right answer. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, why does the author bring in utility maximization? What problem does it solve? Second, how does each side of the debate show up inside the utility equation? And third, what does the author say optimal deterrence strategy looks like? So that was passage 1. We're going to go on now to passage number 2. Just pulling it up here. And you can access these in LSAC's Law Hub platform, by the way. This is LSAT Prep Test 134, Section 4, Passage 2. It's about how Mexican-American communities use Spanish language proverbs. It's a low difficulty passage, but it still tricks you by being so readable that you stop paying attention to structure. Now, this is a humanities passage. The author is cataloging the different jobs proverbs do in Mexican American life. The main point here is that proverbs serve as both teaching tools for young people and vehicles for preserving cultural identity. You've got to get both halves of that to get the main point question right. Now, the most important paragraph here is paragraph 3. That's where the passage stops being about education and starts being about something bigger. If you coast through it because you feel like it's more of the same, you're going to collapse two different ideas into one, and the test is going to punish you for it. Now, paragraph 1 is just background. You want to skim it. The author defines what a proverb is, traces where these proverbs came from, Spain through Mexico, into Mexican American communities, and it notes that many have European roots. Some even have English equivalents. And so this paragraph exists to establish that proverbs are a deep cross-cultural tradition. None of the hard questions are going to pull from here. You want to get the gist of it and move on. Paragraph 2 is where the argument actually begins. The author starts off with something easy to miss. Each use of a proverb is an individual act. It depends on who's speaking and when they're speaking. But then the author pivots away from the individual and towards the community. Proverbs serve a didactic purpose. That just means a teaching purpose. Parents use them to instruct kids on everything from table manners to how to pick friends. Now, here's what you've got to catch. The author doesn't just say parents teach kids with proverbs and leave it there. There is a reason behind it. The author says parents feel that traditional norms are under threat from the surrounding society. And that anxiety is the engine driving the whole paragraph. Parents aren't quoting proverbs because it's cute, they're doing it because they feel like their values are being crowded out. And that motivation matters. If a question asks you why the author discusses peer group relationships, the answer ties back to this pressure parents feel. Not just saying proverbs are educational, that would be too shallow. Now, paragraph 3 shifts to a completely different function. Now, proverbs aren't about teaching rules, they are about identity. The author says proverbs help Mexican Americans feel connected to their ethnic group in a multi-ethnic world. And then the author does something smart. Even proverbs that don't carry an obvious lesson still matter because they transmit the Spanish language. They link young people to folklore, and they keep Mexican culture alive. Now, the word even near the top of paragraph 3 is important. It's telling you the author is expanding the argument beyond education. If a proverb doesn't teach anything specific, it still has value, just value of a different kind. And if you miss that expansion, you're going to treat the whole passage as being about one thing when it's really about two. Now, the key move here is the split between paragraphs 2 and 3. Paragraph 2 says proverbs teach behavior. Paragraph 3 says proverbs preserve heritage. And those are two separate claims. The LSAT wants to know if you can hold them apart. Now, the author's stance here is straightforward. They're saying proverbs are valuable, they serve multiple purposes. And there is no debate in this passage, no competing view, no pushback. The author is building a case, not fighting one. Now, the main trap students fall into here is going too narrow. A lot of students will think this passage is about how proverbs educate kids, but that's paragraph 2, it's only half the story. If your main point answer doesn't also cover cultural preservation, it's wrong. The reverse trap is rarer, but still possible, picking an answer that only covers heritage and drops the teaching angle. Now, I want to share one more thing you want to watch for. The passage mentions that many of these proverbs have European origins and English equivalents. That is a detail students sometimes overweight. You don't want to pick an answer that makes the passage about comparing Mexican American proverbs to European ones because that's background context from paragraph 1. It is not the point. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to make sure you're clear on 3 things. First, what is the difference between what paragraph 2 says proverbs do and what paragraph 3 says they do? Second, why does the author bring up proverbs that don't have an explicit lesson? And third, why does the passage connect proverb use to parents feeling pressure from the larger society? So that was passage number 2. We're going to go on now to passage number 3. This is LSAT PrepTest 134, Section 4, Passage 3. It's a comparative or dual passage set on evolutionary psychology and altruism. It's a medium difficulty passage. The content's pretty straightforward here, and the trap is a bit subtle. Both authors sound academic, but they are in completely different camps. If you miss that, you're going to get the relationship questions wrong. Now, passage A is pro-evolutionary psychology. Passage B is against it. That is the core dynamic. But passage A is still measured, it's careful, it's almost like it's a textbook. So students will walk away thinking both authors are just exploring the topic, but one of them is exploring and the other is attacking. Now you want to start with passage A. The first paragraph opens up with a question. How do you explain altruism through evolution? If evolution is about your own reproductive success, why would anyone help anybody else? That is the puzzle. And the author treats it like it's a real puzzle worth solving, not a flaw in the theory. And that framing matters here. The author already trusts evolutionary psychology enough to work within it. Now the answer shows up right away. The answer shows up right away. They use the word probably lies in. That's the one moment of caution in the entire passage. After that, the author goes all in. Physical resemblance triggers empathy. Empathy leads to helping behavior. Helping behavior spreads the genes that caused it. So each step is building on the last one like a chain. Now, you don't need to memorize the details here. You just got to see that the author presents this chain without ever questioning a single link. So the mother who's rushing in to help her child, that's not there to make you feel something. It's there as proof. The author is saying, look, this gene-based explanation accounts for real behavior. That's meant to serve as evidence. Then the end of passage A is the scale up. Small kin groups first, then bigger communities, then the punchline. Behavior that looks altruistic actually comes from a genetically selfish system. And they're using quotation marks around the word selfish for a reason. The author knows the word sounds harsh, but they're not backing away from the idea. They're endorsing it with a little disclaimer. Now, if you read that sentence as the author being skeptical, you've misread the whole passage. Then passage B, first sentence, they say evolutionary psychology is kind of a conspiracy theory. That is not the author being neutral. Of course, they've already made up their mind. The comparison to conspiracy thinking tells you exactly where this is going. The author's argument is that evolutionary psychology explains behavior by inventing hidden motives that the person doesn't even know about. So you might think you love your kid, but actually your genes are just pulling strings. Now they've got some quiet sarcasm there. They're saying, what seemed to be your unsurprising interest is a conspiracy. So the author thinks this is, of course, ridiculous. Then they give you a fair summary of the evolutionary psychology argument. Monogamous families, slow maturing offspring, gene propagation. The author is giving the other side its best case, but that is the setup so they can knock it down later. Now the question, are they right, is the turn. The author says this kind of reasoning is almost never decisive. You've got to prove that the behavior would only make sense if there were a genetic motive, but helping your kids could be explained by 100 different things. Maybe you care about them, maybe there's social pressure, maybe you're just a decent person. So the evolutionary explanation isn't necessarily wrong, but it's also not the only game in town. And it's also not proven. Then the last few sentences land the real blow. Some things you care about just because you care about them. So that right there is a direct rejection of the whole evolutionary psychology project and a direct rejection of everything passage A just built. Now the key move here, these two passages don't just disagree about whether evolutionary psychology is correct, they disagree about whether its reasoning is even valid. Passage A treats the logic as tight, each step follows from the last. Passage B says the logic has a hole you could drive a truck through. It could never rule out simpler explanations. And the hardest questions will test whether you can see that difference. Now the main trap here is passage A. It sounds balanced. It uses words like probably and puts selfish in quotes, and so students will read those signals and think the author is hedging or being critical. But those are just academic matters. Being polite, the argument here is fully committed. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, what specific flaw does passage B identify in the reasoning passage A relies on? Second, when passage B brings up monogamous families, is that support or is it setup? And third, can you state in one plain sentence what each author actually believes? If you can't, you want to go back and reread the last paragraph of each passage because that's where the authors show their opinions. Now on to passage 4. This is LSAT PrepTest 134, section 4, passage number 4, Dostoyevsky versus the radical Russian literary critics. It's a medium difficulty passage. Reads pretty smoothly, but there is a trap built into it. Dostoyevsky shares just enough common ground with the radicals that students collapse his view into theirs. And if you do that, you're done. Now, this is a humanities passage. It lays out two opposing schools of Russian literary criticism, then parks Dostoyevsky in neither camp. His position is that art must be artistically good first. There might also be usefulness later, but you can't demand it or predict it. Now, the most important paragraph here is paragraph 3. That's where Dostoyevsky stops reacting to other people and states what he actually believes. Everything before it is wind up, everything after it is cleanup. Now, paragraph 1 gives you the two camps fast. One side says literature should stand above ordinary life. The other, the radical critics, says literature must earn its place by being useful to society. It's got to engage with real injustice and help build something new. Then the passage drops in Dostoyevsky. He took a third position. He never doubted reality was the source of literature. That sounds like the radicals. But his version of reality was enormous. It included everything the radicals wouldn't touch. Fantasy, the intangible, things you can't point to. For Dostoyevsky, there was no wall between the real and the fantastic. Now, you want to read this paragraph carefully to separate the two camps. Then notice that Dostoyevsky lands close to one side, but immediately stretches it beyond recognition. Now, paragraph 2 is Dostoyevsky dismantling the radicals' favorite phrase. They wanted literature to depict reality as it is. He says that's empty. Reality isn't sitting there waiting to be copied. It gets shaped by whoever lives it. What's real for you might not be real for me. And so the author's job is not to mirror the world. It's to push past what we think of as the real world entirely. He says the fantastic is not some escape from reality, it is wrapped up inside it. So this paragraph is doing one job, destroying the foundation of the radical position. You just got to know here that Dostoyevsky thinks the starting point of the radicals is broken. Then paragraph 3, you want to slow down here. The radicals insist art must serve a political goal. Dostoyevsky calls that a shameful destiny. And that phrase right there tells you his attitude. He is not mildly disagreeing, he is offended by the logic. They say a work's formal qualities don't matter as long as the goal is good and the purpose is clear. Dostoyevsky says that is a contradiction. If the art isn't well made, it can't actually accomplish anything. Only a fully realized work can do what it sets out to do. Then he defines what artistic means. And here's where students overthink it. His definition is simple. A novelist is artistic when they can put their thoughts into characters and images so clearly that the reader fully understands them. That is it. Artistry is the ability to write well. Now, of course, the LSAT writers might dress this up in fancier language in the choices, but you don't want to fall for that. Come back to this plain definition. Then paragraph 4 handles the usefulness question. The radicals want to know what art is good for. Dostoyevsky's answer is you can't know. He brings up the Iliad. Can anyone measure what this book has done for humanity? No. And sometimes a work looks pointless at first. It might seem to drift away from anything real, but you can't see where it's going yet. This paragraph is not introducing a new idea, it is closing the door on the radicals' demand. They want a guarantee of usefulness up front, and Dostoyevsky says that guarantee is impossible. Now here is the key move. Dostoyevsky agrees with the radicals on one thing. Literature should connect to reality. But he redefines reality so broadly that his version swallows theirs. And then he completely rejects their second demand, that art must be useful, by arguing you can never measure or predict usefulness in advance. The whole passage runs on that split. Shared starting point, but total disagreement on what follows from it. Now, the hardest questions here are going to test whether you can hold both of those things in your head at once. Now, Dostoyevsky's stance is clear and the passage never pushes back on him. The author is presenting his views straight up with respect. The main trap is reading Dostoyevsky as being just a fancier version of the radical critics. They both talk about reality, but his reality includes fantasy. They both care about art's effect, but he refuses to let usefulness be a requirement, and those differences are the whole point. If you miss them, you're going to grab answers that describe the radical position and think they sound right. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to make sure you're clear on these three things. First, what does Dostoyevsky actually mean when he calls a work artistic? Second, why does he say the radical's position contradicts itself? And third, what is the elite example doing in the last paragraph? What argument is it finishing off? So that was passage number 4 in test 134. And by the way, folks, if you're looking for support, if you're looking for guidance, looking for help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this, now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. I'll be back in 2.5 hours for my daily live Q&A on anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. I'll see you all then.